Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Crown Royal Mobility's Perspectives Live series. Our webinars typically coincide with the release of our Perspectives article series, and this is an opportunity to hear an additional angle on the topic straight from our own subject matter experts here at Crown. My name's Jenny Stobbs, and I'm based in London, and I'm responsible for the marketing activities for the various Crown brands within our region. First, to quickly get started, I want to give you a couple of technology tips to keep things running smoothly. So firstly, you'll be on mute throughout the session. If you can also mute yourself, please do. Should you have any technology issues during the webinar, I'll be posting my email address in the right-hand corner of your screen in the chat box. So please contact me directly for some help. You will also hear from me again during the question and answer round at the end of the session. And we also have one more tip. So Crown's Perspective Live webinars have CRP credits available for the ERC's professional certifications. If you would like to gain credits, please just write down the session number, which should be on your screen now. And that is 15290. We'll show this number again at the end of the session. So now I'm pleased to introduce to you Crown World Mobility's Global Practice Leader for Consulting Services, Lisa Johnson. Lisa has been with Crown for 5 years now, and she is responsible for our Perspectives articles and Crown's industry research. She supports our clients with the mobility policies and program strategies, and is a leader in addressing innovations and shifts impacting our industry. Lisa has been in the global mobility area for more than 20 years and is one of the early thought leaders in assignment-related return on investment and in the talent mobility area. So with no further ado, let me hand it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and welcome everyone. So our agenda today is pretty straightforward. I want to give you a little background for our annual trends, and then we're just going to walk through each one. I'm going to try and leave time for a few questions, but we've done this a couple of times this week, and I know that there's very little time at the end. So please make sure you take some notes as you go, and we're happy to respond to email questions as well. The trends this year reflect topics that we've heard about before in most cases. So you're going to see some familiar topics. And I think what's really interesting and that what I'm excited to share with you all today is just really looking for new ways that we're talking about some of the themes that are familiar to us in our industry and how they're evolving. So let's move into the presentation. And I do want to just give you a little bit of the big picture before we go into the trends. So our annual discussion always begins with this larger macro view, world view of what's happening outside of mobility, because industry trends reflect business trends, which reflect world trends at a lot of levels. So this year we know that the economy in general is looking stronger as a whole. There are weeks that you would wonder if that was the case, and certain areas where that might not be the case. But in general, we're seeing a pretty strong economy. And there's also a lot of geopolitical uncertainty, whether it's Brexit or U.S. politics or North Korea or Venezuela, Catalonia. There's a lot going on from a geopolitical perspective. And as many of you know, the World Economic Forum just had its annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland last month, and their conference theme was, there on the left on your screen, creating a shared future in a fractured world. And actually, I like the more mainstream view that's there on the right of your screen from Bloomberg Business Week. And on January 1st, their first issue of the year, the headline was, the global economy looks good unless somebody does something stupid. Yikes. So that's the state of our world, this maybe stronger or strengthening economy and the geopolitical uncertainty. And that's the state of where we're all doing business and moving our employees. So one last little bit of context before we start discussing this year's trends. And that's to kick us off with a quote from our friend Charles Darwin. So as we start, I feel like we cannot underplay the importance that it is for all of us to embrace and manage change. So Darwin says it's not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. And we're all in a moment that requires us not just to be open to change, but leading change. So with that background, we have 10 trends to move through, and we've got about 45 minutes, so fasten your seatbelts, and let's move through this. All right, our first trend that we're going to talk about is a new focus on what we're seeing with the accompanying partner. So there's a lot to talk about with this trend, and our Perspectives article goes into even more detail. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time here on this trend because I think there's some very interesting considerations for all of us as we think about our programs here. So as most of you know, long ago the accompanying partner was called the trailing spouse. And it was usually the trailing wife, right? Today, the accompanying partner is not always a woman, not always a spouse, and we know that this person is more frequently than not someone who also has a career. So today, barriers to accepting international assignments are often connected to the accompanying partner. And this year, we're going to look at some of the creative solutions that some global mobility programs are already putting in place. And there are a few themes. So I want to do a quick dive into two of them that are there on your screen right now, the dual careers and the male accompanying partners. There are a lot more topics to cover, but these two I really want to highlight for today's session. So dual career means that both partners in the relationship have their own careers. And this is a trend that runs across cultures and geographies. I actually posted a Harvard Business Review article on my LinkedIn this week that I thought was so interesting. It was for the general population, but it hit so many of the themes that are the barriers for female assignees, that are the challenges for dual career couples, for the international assignment world as well, and for global careers. So we know that 2/3 of couples in many parts of the world today are dual career. In Canada and the UK, that's the case. In the U.S., it's 60%, but dual career is just increasingly the norm. So one trend that we see out of this dual career norm is an increase in split families. Because at the end of the day, a dual career norm means that the decision to accept an assignment, it's not just emotional, but it's also financial. So the split family is one of the trends where the family stays home and the employee goes on the assignment. One of our companies that we work with is seeing an increase in commuter assignments as a result, and that falls probably under a similar umbrella to the split family in terms of, the solution for the challenge of the dual career issues. Crown is a sponsor of the Permits Foundation, and probably many of you in your organizations are also sponsors of that European nonprofit that works with governments around the globe to promote the availability of spouse work permits. There are only about 40 countries in the world that make spouse-partner work authorizations simple to get. And the last comment I want to make on this dual career issue is that tackling the dual career issue is linked to increasing the number of female assignees once you get into the manager or the mid-career levels. And that's a really good segue into another angle of the accompanying partner that we're going to talk about this year, and I'm going to talk to you about right now, which is the male accompanying partner. Historically, the accompanying partner has been female, and the impact of that history is that traditional partner support has been designed by women and directed towards women, whether that's expat social groups, welcome orientations, mom activities, school associations, afternoon teas and classes. And that means two things. For me, actually, when we were just really putting our thoughts together on this trend, I not only thought about the accompanying male partner, but I also thought about the female employee who's the assignee, because they actually miss out on a lot of these activities that would help them integrate into being part of the women in the expat community because they're at work. But also the male accompanying partner is often the only guy at the activity. and that's still true today. If you visit expat community activities, often there's only one male partner at those activities, but there's a guy there, but just not very many. So 2 quick comments. Of course, the financial impact of not having both partners working for the length of the assignment is almost untenable for a family that's accustomed to that income. And also, last year, I just want to share with you a real-life story that last year I was meeting with the female head of HR for the Asia region for an Australian bank, and she was on assignment in Manila. And she said that her husband, during the 3 years they had been there, had experienced real challenges, even in terms of the local community not knowing how to really understand a man whose wife worked and he didn't. It was socially and culturally a challenge. So here she was at the end of her assignment. She's the head of HR for the region, and she couldn't convince her logical successor to take on the assignment for the exact same reasons. So she had someone in the pipeline to replace her at the end of her assignment, but that person was also a woman and wasn't willing to put her partner in that situation and couldn't accept the assignment. So this year we really need to get creative around redefining the support for partners and sharing best practices at work. So to finish this trend, I want to share with you 5 creative solutions that are already out there and can be your basic checklist for the accompanying partner. So here are 5. I want you, as you look through this, to see how many of these you already have in your program. If you already have all 5 of them, then let's get even more creative. But if you don't have all 5 of these, then maybe there's a chance to think about your program and add this for your accompanying partner support. First, the partner career search support. Crown has this in-house in our partner support service, but it's available outside of Crown too. This is something pretty commonly found and a great addition to your program to encourage your accompanying male partners to accept the assignment with your employee. Second, believe it or not, is intercultural training. It's one of the best ways to make sure that your non-traditional assignees and their non-traditional partners get the chance to consider what the local work and social environment is like, and in this case for the male accompanying partner, or for the dual careers, to speak as a couple to the challenges and to develop that strategy in advance. Or right there at the start of the assignment. It's so important. Intercultural training is not just about learning the do's and don'ts of local culture. It's an opportunity to stop and have the employee and their partner really think about their strategy, what some of the challenges will be, and how to thrive in that culture. So it's really simple and straightforward solution that's right in front of you and in most of your policies. I think 80% of policies have intercultural training in it. Third, some companies, in order to get the skilled assignees that they need, will offer the accompanying partner the option to apply for a local position and to apply for a local position in order to get the skilled assignees what they need. And they'll offer them the chance to apply for a local position, not as an expat, but at least to work at something that they're qualified for. So that's something to consider if you have a really specific situation or specific location where it's really the dual career issue is really impacting your ability to recruit the right talent. So we're seeing social media become a great way to start a community for accompanying partners also. So that's that 4th, diverse peer networking communities. And we're seeing that as, it's just lots of companies are putting in place, whether it's Yammer or it's Facebook, having communities that support the different diversity within your accompanying partner groups and to break out of those historical Lady T scenarios, right? Not that there's anything wrong with Lady T scenarios, but we need a variety. We need more activities and more ways to interact. And finally, a quick win is to audit the current policy and program support. So the communications of a global mobility program need to be looked at to make sure they're updated to address the male accompanying partners or non-traditional partner scenarios, and looking to make sure that the pronouns like she and the type of support that's offered are more neutral or more open to the expectation that your accompanying partners are diverse also. Clearly, there's a lot to talk about with this trend in 2018, but we have 9 more to go, and we're going to keep going on some other ways. Okay. All right. Our second trend is mobility return on investment, or ROI. And again, this trend is not new, but at Crown we think it's time to reframe this discussion, and I think in our industry it's time to reframe it. It seems to stay in one place, and we want to kickstart it this year. So first let's look at what the current state is, because maybe for some of you, you aren't familiar with what is already out there, or you may not be aware that you have some mobility ROI infrastructure already in place, but you don't talk about it that way or don't promote it that way. So let's look at that, and then I want to just quickly share with you what I think is moving ahead with ROI for 2018. So we still know that there's little agreement on how to define ROI. A few companies are running with mobility ROI. They're taking this as a big strategy for their organization, but it's a few companies. Assignment-related technology is definitely enabling us to support data analytics, and that allows us in our industry to measure aspects of mobility programs, but it isn't the industry norm yet. And some companies have just said, we're moving past that ROI idea. We're global, we need mobility, but now we want to be just smarter about how we run our mobility program, and we're going to talk about that later in this webinar. So for hitting refresh on ROI, let's take a quick look at the 2 primary ROI strategies already commonly in place today, right there on your screen: assignment segmentation and ROI program infrastructure, and then we'll look at something that's new for this year. All right, so we'll go to the next slide. And the first popular ROI strategy today that's already in place that most of you probably already have adapted is assignment segmentation. That's the terminology, segmentation. We see it at all the conferences, in all the papers written about ROI, assignment segmentation. And it's a result of companies recognizing that one-size-fits-all policies makes no business sense. So why would anyone spend the same amount or provide the same level of support for a targeted critical role like a senior manager and for an early career employee who's motivated by an adventure and getting a new experience? Those are not apples-to-apples scenarios, and most companies today have some way of differentiating those 2 types of assignments or moves. They use flexible policies like a core flex policy, which is very popular, or tiered policies. The ROI angle is that you're investing more in assignments that have critical business drivers and therefore a different value to you and your organization. All right, let's look at the next slide. The second way that global mobility programs focus on ROI today, these are approaches that are already in place by many companies today. And that second approach is by using a repatriation and career planning lens for the international assignment. This ROI infrastructure has been on the rise for at least a decade. I think the first article I wrote on this was probably 15 years ago. So some of these issues around linking career planning and repatriation to ROI have been around, as many of you know, for a long time. So when you look at the 7 bullet points on your screen, your program or your client's program, if you're outside of a corporate program, should have at least 4 of these in place. I'm giving you 4 as your low mark here. If you should have at least 4 of these because they're pretty standard for companies that care about ROI. And on study after study, 96% of global mobility professionals say that they care about ROI, but only about 6% say that they're actually measuring it. So here, for those 96% of you on here are things that if you care about ROI, you should have at least 4 of these. Let's just quickly walk through these 7. First is selection criteria. Is there something other than technical skills and willing to go that makes this person qualified for the assignment? Is it the past 2 performance reviews that have been at a certain level? Is it their intercultural competencies, their previous experience? What other than technical skills and willing to go makes that person qualified? The second bullet point, I think it's a quick win, and that's to require a senior level sponsor who is not the person's manager. And in some companies, they actually would put 2 sponsors. I've seen them have 2 senior level sponsors to approve of the person who's going and that assignment. Then we know there's less chance for a manager to get rid of a bad performer through an assignment, which unfortunately still happens, or to pick a person that they like instead of the right person. So if diversity mobility is important to you and you have a D&I strategy, having a sponsor might ensure that your diversity candidates are part of the selection process as well, right? Okay, next we have for ROI companies, they require assignment objective setting. I think this is pretty standard by most of your programs today, where you outline here's why you're going, and that's shared with the employee, with the sending and the receiving managers, HR, just having the assignment objective. I'm hoping that everyone can check that off their list. Then we have career planning, and that's linked to repatriation. That's another one, right, that the career planning and repatriation have some connection if it's an out-and-back assignment, right, if it's assignment and not consecutive assignments or career, global career, but that there's something that's going to happen at the end of that assignment. Then we have performance management being linked to assignments. Is there a field or a category in your performance management process for the general population that is also about international experience or assignment-related growth? That's what assignment ROI companies do. They have that embedded in their performance management forums or process or discussions. The post-assignment integration we're going to talk about in another trend, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but providing that repatriation briefing or the integration after the assignment to leverage that experience is so critical for an ROI strategy. And the last one is probably one of the easiest ones, and many of you have heard me speak to it before. It's something that I will bring up over and over again because I think it's a very simple way to start measuring ROI on your program. It's a first step. So no matter how big or how small your organization, you should be measuring the attrition and retention of employees with international experience. So you need to add that question to your exit interviews. Have you had international assignment experience while here in this company? That's simple. All right. So where does that leave us for moving ahead and moving forward this year with ROI? What I would like to talk about on the next slide is customizing your ROI dashboard. So which priorities are you going to measure? Is it corporate priorities? Is it Is it your corporate priorities like diversity and inclusion or the business function, like filling open positions cheaper or faster, or developing your succession planning or retaining talent? Is it about the employee experience and flexibility and measuring the employee experience? And maybe it's about simplifying the assignment process or your global mobility team and putting that on your dashboard in terms of the new competencies that you're bringing onto the team or how well you work together. What are the priorities? I think we have to have an agile notion of what ROI is and what you're measuring, and I think an ROI dashboard is going to be both valuable as a discussion tool in your organization and as a way to measure, but also I think it's kind of a fun way to look at it in a tangible way, right? So moving ROI forward in 2018, I want us to be thinking about what's my priority on my mobility ROI dashboard for my program. All right, our trend number 3 is lump sums and cash allowances. I bet there's not a big surprise with this. It's a huge trend in our industry, and so you're going to hear a lot about this topic this year, and I really want all of us to be comfortable with it, to understand the pros and the cons. So lump sum cash allowance is about cash instead of services. It's primarily driven by early career moves, the increase in millennials in the workforce. the preference for DIY, do-it-yourself moves. And for many companies, it's thought of as a quick and easy way to move someone, to let them figure it out. So a new reason that this type of approach is going to be discussed even more this year is that U.S. tax laws changed this year for the first time in decades. And that's not just a U.S. domestic event. It actually impacts global mobility programs, and we'll talk about it in just a minute because it's much broader than a U.S. issue. But in the past, companies and their employees could financially benefit from the company providing actual relocation support to the employee. It was not income and it was not taxable. Now that's not the case. So this impacts employees moving into, out of, and within the U.S. And we're going to discuss that in another section. So hold that thought. But for lump sums and cash allowances, the main pros that people talk about with the lump sums are flexibility, low administrative burden, at least on the surface, a predictable budget, and for some employees, they might be able to actually pocket some money and make some money on receiving that and spending their money wisely. My experience is that doesn't always happen, but that's one of what's considered the driving positive factors for the lump sum moves and cash allowances. Now, I just want to do a quick review of the challenges with the lump sum cash allowance approach. So as it says on your screen, you don't know what you don't know. So employees given a lump sum are usually early in their careers or new hires who could really use some guidance. They haven't experienced moves before. And any of you who have been responsible for supporting employee moves that are on a lump sum, you know that they require sometimes as much support as a VIP move. They ask a lot of questions and actually want some guidance, but the expectation is that this is going to be a really low-cost, low administrative support program. And so I think there's a little bit of a myth there with that assumption. And there are a handful of companies, just a few, that have entered our industry just in the past couple of years with a technology-only solution. And it's been a really exciting change, and it's been a disruptive change in a really, I think, positive way. But their technology-only solutions have really had to be adjusted quickly, and the business model has had to change really fast because their clients have said just the technology is not enough for our employees. They need to be able to ask an expert. They need to be able to look for guidance. So the technology-only solution we know is not the solution. The other thing is duty of care, and the risk to employees doing their own thing is an issue that we're going to talk about actually in another trend. So what are some ways to move ahead with this discussion of lump sum and cash allowances here in 2018. First, we know it's a big deal. We know it's a direction that is not going to go away. And to that end, it's something that we need to be able to manage better, right? So we need to be able to not just Crown, but all of us as global mobility professionals who are using this approach or supporting people with this approach need to give better guidance and options that allow employees to use their flexible allowances to meet their lifestyle preferences. And we need to be able to create policies that do that and create support. So we're going to be watching the employee experience a lot this year too, with those people who are using lump sum approaches. We want to watch employee safety and well-being. If your employee has to rent a truck, pack and load boxes, what happens if their lorry or their truck breaks down and they can't lift those boxes? What about staying in Airbnb or on a friend's sofa? Whose responsibility is it when something goes wrong there? Is it the employee's responsibility or is it the company's responsibility? Is the employee productive at work while managing a move by themselves? This year we need to commit to being really well-versed in the lump sum discussion, to know the pros and the cons, to use it with an educated and knowledgeable support, and because it's not going to go away. So how we advise those employees on handling it and educating, providing the right information is what's going to be really key. So I think, it's something that's just going to be growing and growing, but we need to get really good at it. All right. our fourth trend. It is to move us ahead on the diversity mobility discussion. So I'm calling it Diversity 2.0. We started this discussion. Crown did some research on this, on diversity mobility back in 2013 with a research initiative that we collaborated on with EY, and we were pushing the topic forward. And over the past couple of years, it's been growing in our industry. We see it much more talked about in panel discussions at conferences and in articles and on the web, and we really want to keep moving this forward here in 2018. Diversity and inclusion is important to us at Crown. It's important to many of your organizations and to our industry. So when we first started looking at this topic, there were three main findings in our research. First, any company that was really already focused on diversity mobility was a company that cared strongly about diversity and inclusion in their larger organization. So just having that as a strong core value in your organization can help to start that discussion in mobility. Second, for companies with a diversity mobility focus, the primary emphasis then was, and I think probably still is, increasing the number of female assignees. And back in 2013, when we first did the research, there just weren't too many examples of diversity mobility strategies. So what have we seen as examples of these strategies over the past couple of years? Here are some pretty common diversity mobility examples. First, expanding eligibility. For certain regions and cultures, recognizing that the definition of family varies and that limiting eligibility can be a barrier to accepting assignments. So within Asia, we know that there are diversity mobility-focused companies that have expanded the eligibility to the parents of the employees because they know that that's the way that they can decrease the barrier for getting their employees in certain parts of Asia to accept assignments. The second one is adding flexibility to policies to meet diversity goals. I think this is probably the most important way to open a diverse assignee population. Is the budget to allow, for example, the ex-spouse of your employee to visit their children while on assignment? Maybe it's to, if you have single parents who are also employees going on an assignment, it's to be able to maybe give one additional round-trip ticket to someone that that employee chooses to come and help them get settled in their home, get their children into the school, maybe another family member, and then that they wouldn't stay on the assignment, but in the first few weeks, when the employee is trying to focus on their new job, they have someone there to support them. That would be the cost of an extra round-trip ticket. That might be feasible if this was a diversity mobility goal and trying to increase the number of diversity assignees, right? But does your company have a low-cost employee-initiated policy to support the millennial population's desire for adventure moves or new experiences? Flexible policies help to meet diversity goals. 3, making split family policies more robust to support same-sex partners, dual career scenarios when needed. We see policies flexible enough to support same-sex and dual career scenarios that are split family policies. And I mentioned that when we talked about the accompanying partner. And allowing for split family policies if the partner can't leave their career or immigration won't let them accompany the employee, this then makes it a family-friendly and supportive program, right? 4, linking your company's unconscious bias training to assignment selection activities. If you are like many companies out there, I know Crown offers unconscious bias training, and probably many of your organizations do, and it's for managers often or for recruiters, right? And it's even required for certain roles to understand and be aware of unconscious bias in selection, in performance management, in recruiting, in promotions, right? So some companies are now requiring it for their sending and receiving managers in mobility to help ensure that the selection of the assignee is not limited to the assumptions of the manager. and that how employees are treated in the host location is more inclusive and more supportive of the company's diversity goals. Because even if you're recruiting a lot of diversity and mobility assignees, if they arrive in your host location in your organization and there's no consciousness of that, it could be impacting the experience of that assignee. So, for example, a female assignee may arrive and no one in the host location understands what the issues are even around the male accompanying partner, and so then that female assignee is on their own in helping their own partner to get settled in, for example. All right. 5, promoting diversity in your assignee population. We've seen best practice companies start to promote the diversity of their assignee population in how they market their program, in how they recognize the diversity and speak to it. Maybe videos with some of your diversity assignments and assignees talking about their experiences. So in 2018, we're going to be expanding our work in this area and continuing with some new research. And if it's a topic that you're interested in, please let us know. We'd love for you to be a part of this discussion with us, too. All right, our 5th trend is duty of care, risk management, and assignee well-being. And that's a mouthful. That's a lot. But there's some connectedness here. So I want to just quickly run through this with you. So we recently conducted some research on mobility duty of care, and we found that about 49%, just under half, have made some changes to their approach to mobility duty of care strategies since the attacks in Paris in 2015, the terrorist attacks. Now, I know that lots of other events happened before that, but it became a critical marker for today for companies who decided to do something different that triggered some changes in different people's programs. So there's no universal set of rules or regulations in terms of the legal obligations for business travelers and international assignees in terms of corporate rules and regulations. But there is an increasing awareness that we need to do better. Employees really look to their companies to do the right thing and to guide them to be safe and to help them when they're in need, whether they're traveling on business or on an assignment. So we see more companies forming stakeholder groups that include their global mobility teams, but also business leaders, HR, corporate security, external partners. We see the benefit of technology developments for sure, like the travel tracking technology that many companies already have in place and the policy to ensure that employees who are traveling are using their travel systems and their suppliers that are in place that are vetted, right? We see progress and new steps in general being taken. So looking there at the bottom of your screen in that box, I think it's an interesting phenomena that I have seen cited in several articles just over this past 12 months. And I think it's kind of interesting because then they talk about what business travelers are most concerned about in terms of safety. It's terrorist attacks today, right? But the 3 most frequent personal safety events for travelers are much more common events, road accidents, illness, and petty crime. So it's very interesting, and International SOS has done some studies on this as well as other organizations, but that the thing people are most worried about are not the most common events that actually happen to our employees when they're traveling or on assignments. Okay. Another angle that we cannot ignore, because it takes us back even to the lump sum and the DIY mobility trends, is looking at the do-it-yourself approaches that are emerging and becoming more and more popular. This trend of giving employees cash drives some employees to take the cheapest flight, to use the off-the-beaten-path temporary housing or a low-cost car rental. And some of these online market options, like Airbnb, are not necessarily regulated in every location, and they're not legal in some countries. However, if you have an app on your phone, whether it's for Uber or Airbnb or other online market options that you're accustomed to using, many times you can pull it up and use it in different locations around the world despite that lack of regulation or it not being legal. I've done that myself. Was in Chile just a few months ago and used Uber, but it's not even legally allowed to exist there. But my Uber app worked, and someone showed up in their regular car. But anyway, so the fact that we're accustomed to using those apps and our employees are is an issue. So the risk and the liability need to be made clear. I would encourage you to look at your mobility policy and update it this year to reflect the company's position on DIY mobility. Some of you say, we have so many millennials and they want to use Airbnb and they want to use these options, and we have no choice. We have to let them do it. And fair enough. We find that most companies are still not ready to put that in their policy, but there are some cases where that is happening. Either way, your policy needs to make your position clear, whether you're allowing people to do it or not, and state the employees' liability and the company's liability in that policy. So that's something that we've been working with companies on this year, and I'm hoping that all of you will just take a minute and look at your policy and make sure it's in there. Because ultimately, employees want their company to give them guidance on what is safe and why, and definitely we're just getting started on this topic, and in 2018, we're all going to be talking about it more in this industry. So I'm looking forward to continuing that discussion with many of you. All right, the final area I want to speak to on this particular trend has to do with something that I think is really positive and really cool. Employee well-being, just employee well-being in our organizations is starting to be talked about inside best practice global mobility programs. And so I think this is a result of just the general increased focus on employee well-being in the workplace. So if you're like our organization here, you may have a lot of employees who are walking around with their Fitbits on. We have Global Corporate Fitness Challenge at Crown with Fitbits and Teams, and many companies do. There are companies that offer yoga classes or tobacco cessation programs, work-life balance programs in their general population, right? So here it comes, and it's moving into global mobility. And the great news is that there are already many aspects of a global mobility program that would fall under the employee well-being initiative and area, right? So we know that employee well-being is linked to higher productivity. It's something that many companies are talking about. So I want you this year to promote assignee well-being support. And right there on your screen are things that are probably already in your program that could be linked to an assignee well-being program. And you could even have a promotional, a promotional campaign on it. So it might be those medical checkups that are already in most policies that are required before someone goes on an assignment, partner support, cross-cultural and language training, settling in services, mentor programs. I encourage you to think about what aspects of your program promote assignee well-being and to promote it yourself and talk about it in your program. We need to be more creative in our industry and more creative with how we update how we talk about our programs. I don't think anyone's ever necessarily talked about it as assignee well-being program, but why not? Let's do it. All right, number 6, and we'll move a little faster here. Our 6th trend is smart mobility. And do you see a theme as we're going through these? We talked about ROI mobility, diversity mobility, smart mobility. Mobility is becoming more nuanced as a business area, isn't it? I think it's pretty interesting. So smart mobility is a really big topic, but let's just focus on 2 angles of this subject. One is the increased use of data and data analytics. We hear about this every day, right, in our industry and outside of our industry, in our organizations and in the general population. And the other is innovations in technology, which certainly is a theme in our world today and in our companies and in our industry. All right, but let's just start with the data. The reality is that companies of all shapes and sizes can move ahead with data collection and tracking. So if you're one of those companies that's just getting started, here on the screen are some common data tracking areas for mobility programs. And for those of you who have been doing this for a while, you're going to look at these boxes and it can be your checklist. Yep, we do that. Yep, we do that. These are just some of the basics. There are a lot more ways to track data around your program. But I think what's kind of cool when you look through these that are on your screen right now is that many of the categories reflect some of the trends we've just been discussing already today on this session, right? Retention, segmentation, assignment types, diversity and gender of assignees. So there are a lot of things that you can get started with. So if you haven't started really putting data and tracking to your program, pick a couple of these and get started. That just knowing the number of international assignees and transferees in your program, or how much time is left on some of those assignments, so you know how to prepare for the next steps, whether it's localization or repatriation, or filling the position if it needs to be filled, your home and host country combinations. That's basic data that you should be able to do. And so if you haven't started that, just pick a few and get started. For those of you who are already collecting data, and I know that many of you are already in that space, so that's great, taking data analytics to the next level is smart mobility hitting its stride. So there are a number of companies doing this, measuring things like how long it takes for the employee to get up and running during and after the move. Are you asking the employees that as they're going through their move, and what that job connection to the move experience was like? Are we asking their manager their perspective on that? Because isn't that the point of the move that we in mobility are supporting, to get someone to a location to get up and running in their new job? So what's the timing on that? How does that experience that we give relate to their ability to move ahead in their job in the new location? Or some of the smart analytics we actually recently did here in our organization was mapping out the number of touch points and attachments that the assignee or the transferee receives, and really looking at ways to reduce them and to increase efficiency. So the data analytics can then lead to process improvements. Or using the data on gender of assignees, not just how many women are on assignment, but how many of them are in more mature stages of their career, or how many leaders in your organization had international assignments. That's interesting data and stories to tell with that data. I think it's just going to get more and more interesting, more valuable, and for those of us who are data geeks, it's going to be more fun too. All right, the second quick look in smart mobility, under the smart mobility umbrella, just to wrap it up, is to take a quick look at technology and the disruptive, and I mean in a positive way, the disruptive ways technology continues to support mobile employees and their families. So we know that temporary housing companies, real estate firms, settling in services, language training, those are all examples of areas in our industry that are improving customer choice and experience, personalized experience, targeted information as a result of technology, right? Here at Crown, we've rolled out our e-packing, e-signatures, virtual home surveys. It's something that's really changing our industry, right? Those chatbots that we interact with airlines or at a bank are rapidly going to become the new normal as part of the employee experience in assignments or in transfers with policy, with FAQs. So what's next? I mean, I think every day when you open your newspaper or get on your digital online news feed, you see something that looks kind of interesting that's right on its way. And the most recent one I saw was a wearable technology that's going to be coming out soon, that if you're visiting or on an assignment in a new location, you can have that app on your phone or on a wearable device, and if something's in another language, it automatically translates it and shows up on your screen in your own language. So the signs in stores and things like that. Who knows? I bet every one of us on this call has some example of something you heard about that is coming up that is really interesting. All right. I'm not going to spend tons of time on our trend number 7. It's more of an event that's going to drive a few trends. And we discussed this earlier in our trend on lump sums. So if it's a topic you want to know a lot more about, both in the Perspectives article, but also we have a few papers that we've put together to help you understand the issues. I think ERC has done a great job with providing education on this topic, and their website has webinar that's available that was taped. and they have papers as well. So there are a lot of resources on this, and happy to help you understand those issues. But the reason that this, like Brexit, is not just a domestic U.S. issue, not just a domestic issue, is that, one, the U.S. is one of the top 3 locations and home countries for international assignments in terms of volume. Many global companies do business in the U.S. or have moving people into or out of or within the U.S. Another reason is that historically the global mobility policy has been shaped by U.S. tax laws. That's kind of interesting. It was one of the first countries to push employee relocation into a formal industry back in the 1970s even. And so it shaped like what we are, the duration of assignments being 12 months or less being a short-term assignment, and 12 months or more being a long-term assignment is a trigger that's based on a U.S. tax assumption. Short-term assignments as well. The 5-year duration that's pretty standard is based on a U.S. tax assumption, even though we are global companies, and I have a database of policies that are half of them are European headquartered companies, and they still have those same durations and notions of assignment duration. So I think that's an interesting fact that a lot of people don't even know. So I think that this will change things. We're probably going to see more companies come up with alternative options for traditional household goods shipments. We're probably going to see lump sums on the rise as companies have to pay for the tax on relocation expenses in a new way. And that additional cost for some companies, and we're going to watch this, might mean that some companies will shift their long-term assignments to a creative use of short-term assignments to avoid that additional cost. I don't know. There's a lot to talk about here. And like I said, if you are interested in knowing more details on this, please let us know, and we can help you in that direction, get you some information, and have that discussion with you. All right, our 8th trend that we're looking at is employee-initiated moves. Now, many of you remember that our last research that we published in December, just a couple of months ago, was on lower-cost approaches to mobility, and the employee-initiated transfer policy was one of them. The drivers are talent mobility strategies, so the companies are becoming more mature with talent mobility, and the shift that millennials are bringing to our industry. The low-cost adventure move is really critical to companies with large millennial populations. Oh, sorry, I just jumped ahead. So more than half of companies that we surveyed have employee-initiated policies in their programs. So many of you might already have this, and I'm curious if it's a new policy or an older one that was designed for more traditional drivers for employee-initiated moves. But today, those companies that said that they're seeing an increase in this and that they're using this as a new policy are really driven by companies that have this talent mobility strategy and large numbers of millennials. Now, the red box on your screen to me is one of the most interesting things. It's my to-do list if I had this policy and was looking at my challenges. What are my top challenges in using this policy and making it a viable tool for my talent mobility program? What we found in our survey was that the top challenges of a little over 100 companies that we talked to said getting buy-in from more old-school managers, traditional managers who haven't bought into the talent strategy around the millennial population. It was really hard to get their buy-in. So you have a policy, but no one's going to use it. It's not an effective policy, right? So we got to get more buy-in there if it's important to your talent strategy. The other is differentiating between company-initiated moves and employee-initiated moves, because as you know, an employee-initiated move policy is going to be much less robust and much more low-cost. It's a low-cost mobility tool, right? So what's the differentiation between them? Do we have eligibility clarity to make sure that people aren't deciding, not sure which one to get, or becomes a negotiation tool? So if these were my top 2 challenges, that would be my exciting challenge this year to work on those, and at the end of this year say, I've solved those two problems in my program. I've worked with my team. We've come up with creative options. I think that would be really, really interesting. All right, our ninth, we're getting down towards the end, and cost savings is just one of those topics that will always be on our trend list. So that said, it's really interesting that many companies report being somewhat satisfied with their overall program costs. But we've discussed a number of common cost savings approaches already here today, haven't we? Segmenting policies, employee-initiated moves, lump sum moves, better selection decisions, retaining talent at the end of an assignment for return on investment. But there are four key changes that companies we find have either already put in place or are planning for in 2018, and they're right there on your screen. The development of policies closely aligned with the business's reasons for the moves, like employee-initiated moves, developmental, project-based. Second, the shift away from home country balance sheet-based assignments, which we've discussed a lot before, haven't we, with local plus moves, with local to local moves, permanent transfers, moving more people local to local. That's how our organization does it with our moves, and we move a lot of people. But we also see that with many other companies, even some people that use host country and home country compensation approaches depending on the type of move, right? So that's that segmentation. Third, alternatives to household goods shipments. We are certainly seeing more allowances, like furniture allowances when you get there instead of shipping your stuff, excess baggage, a default in your policy that says you are required to look for furnished housing first. If it's not available in the new location, then we will ship your stuff. So that's certainly something out there. And core flex policies, even for domestic moves, adjusting the policy to meet the budget and the employee needs, but not using one size fits all. All right, what we have to remember really fast is that cost savings initiatives always have a double-edged sword, right? So just this year we had a client that went to an extreme lump sum, no-touch policy for their new hires, and the response was extremely negative for those employees and their experience. So you always have to make sure that when you're reducing costs, which is really important to do whenever possible, that you're also making sure that your goals are able to be met, whether it's with the employee experience or with your diversity mobility goals and or your millennial goals, whatever it is, right? So we want to make sure that that you're not getting barriers to moves or employee dissatisfaction as a result of your cost savings. And our final, it's appropriate that our final trend here, and thanks for staying with us through our whole session, but our final trend here is to highlight what's new and changing around repatriation. That's that event that happens at the end of an international assignment. And so to me, this trend represents a really great opportunity. You can see on your screen, we looked at over 100 policies in our database, global policies. About half of them were European headquartered companies, and 87% of companies are including repatriation in their international assignment policy. That's awesome, right? 87%. But what we found was that almost all respondents are only covering the tactical elements of repatriation, moving the employee and their stuff back to the home country at the end of an assignment. When you look at that other piece of data right there on the screen, you see that only 9% of companies are addressing the talent mobility aspects of repatriation. So what? So that means there's a lot of room for progress this year when it comes to how repatriation is handled. If you say that you're a talent mobility program, that you really care about the talent side of the program, then you must have something other than tactical elements of repatriation in your program. And I've put some here on the screen on our Perspectives article on the trends, which you will all receive. You will see that this goes into more detail on this. The most basic improvement is that last one there on the red boxes, adding a repatriation integration briefing into the policy. it's something, I know at Crown our intercultural services offer it. I think a lot of companies have that in their intercultural services too, but with more mature global mobility programs, it's pretty typical. It sets the assignee and the partner up for understanding their role, their responsibility, and leveraging their experience and in their next roles and their post-assignment personal lives and professional lives. So why don't you do the test? See if you're in the 87% or in the 9%, and what's something that you can add to your program. All right. As we wrap up right here, almost at the top of the hour, I just want to encourage you to collaborate with all of us. I think we have room to share our best practices and things that are interesting us and our challenges, but also some of the things that we're doing differently, all of us. And I'll leave you with, we started with Darwin, but I'm going to leave you with a quote from Andy Warhol. They always say time changes things, but you actually have to change them yourself. So let's take things into our own hands and make some changes this year. All right, I'm going to hand it back to you, Jenny. It's the very end. We may not have time for questions, but we can certainly wrap it up and get questions through emails, too.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So hi again, everyone. It's me, Jenny. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. We've had some submitted, so we'll try and get back to you with answers on those. So I hope you've enjoyed it. The annual trends are always a great way to start the year. And remember that you do receive CRP credits for the ERC certificate, and the number is 15290. So our prospectus articles are posted on the CWM website, and all of you on today's webinar will receive one when it's launched in the coming week. You'll also receive a feedback form, so let us know what you think and what additional questions you have on our survey findings. Thank you so much for attending Crown's Perspective Live session, and a big thanks to my colleague, Lisa. And until next time, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Bye, everybody.